Well, good evening, good morning, good day, wherever you are calling from. My screen has just gone off. My name is Pete Horsley. I'm the founder of Remarkable. I'm a white male in my mid-40s, and I often you'll find me wearing a hat, and my pronouns are he and him. Remarkable is the venture of Cerebral Palsy Alliance, and we have the backing from our principal partner, iCare, as well as partners Telstra, Vivcord, and Microsoft. Remarkable is where technology meets human potential, and we see an incredible gap in the progress and innovation in technology that breaks down barriers to full inclusion of all human experience. And we run a 16-week startup accelerator program in Australia that equips early stage startups with seed funding, some mentoring and support networks to help commercialize their startups. I want to acknowledge that I am talking to you on Guringai land, and this is Aboriginal land. It was never ceded; it's always sacred, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I also acknowledge that we have people joining us from many other places, both in Australia and around the world, and so I pay my respects to the traditional owners and elders of those lands as well. I'd also like to acknowledge the disability advocates who have played a massive role in advancing the rights of people with disability, leading to address the inequalities faced by people with disability, and they've really paved the way for us. And that gives us both a privilege but also a responsibility because of that history. So today's conversation is about designing for user empowerment. It's part of Remarkable Insights, and Remarkable Insights really tries to see the significant opportunity that we've got to be able to leverage technological innovation and to drive an inclusive future. But it asks the question, who is being left behind as we kind of advance technologically? And we also ask, how do we create not just an inclusive future, but how do we create an inclusive now? And so today's conversation is part of that. So for anyone who wants to join the conversation on social media, our social handles are on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn is @RemarkableTech. And if you could use the hashtag Remarkable Insights. So this event has live captioning that is available down in the toolbar underneath the image, and our Auslan interpreter is David. Welcome, David. It's good to have you with us. We'll be recording this event, and this is available later on our YouTube channel as well, so be sure to subscribe. Now, you don't want to hear my voice for too much longer, so I want to introduce our three incredible panelists tonight. We have Leonie Watson from Tetralogical, Christine Hemphill from Open Inclusion, and Chris Patno from Google. Welcome to each of you. And each of you are actually in the UK, and we happen to have Chris and Christine in the same location. So welcome to you all. It's great to have you along. So this concept of design for user empowerment might be a familiar term to some people, but perhaps it isn't a well-known term to everyone. So Leonie, I want to ask you this question. Do you mind explaining a little bit about what designing for user empowerment is, please?
Sure, thanks, Pete. So for me, personally, it has two distinct definitions, but of course they merge. I have a disability, I'm blind. So part of my answer about what it means is it's when product services are designed that I can use them, enjoy them, get the job done, do whatever it is I came to do, and not have to fight every step of the way to get there. Flipping that around to a professional and designer kind of point of view, it's really about making sure that when we do design products and services, we're including everybody in that target audience in the research that we do, in the testing that we do, in the creative thinking that we do, the requirements that we put together. There is the phrase, nothing without us. And that really sums it up for me. We have to include people with disabilities and other accessibility needs every step of the way through the design and development process, because otherwise we're just guessing, and guessing doesn't really get us very far. If we're creating a product that's aimed at young people under the age of 16, then we need to include people from that target audience, in every aspect of the design and development process. And we have to remember that people with disabilities and accessibility needs are woven into that particular demographic, as they are every demographic. So we can't separate any of this. We can't bolt it on. It's just got to be there from the beginning all the way through.
It's brilliant. That's such a fantastic response. And I guess we see some ubiquitous technologies that we use all day, every day, were first designed for people with disability, but ended up being used beyond the disability community. Solutions like kind of personal texting, captioned video, optical character recognition, or OCR, allowing for text to speech. So Christine, I want to ask you this question. Why do you believe this kind of inclusive design holds so much hope for the future of design?
I think it's such a powerful way to look at the world when you look at the world through different perspectives. And as Leonie was just saying, there are so many different perspectives, and there are so many different perspectives even within disability. So by going to those different perspectives, you'll understand, back to that kind of what's the empowerment here. Well, it's actually flipping that and saying, how are people disempowered today? And that disempowerment can happen in a functional way. It can also happen in an emotional way. So this isn't just about access. This is actually about that appreciation, enjoyment, design for delight, design for experience. And the only way you can get there is understanding different people's experience and understanding how varied experience can be depending on personal characteristics, but also age, as Leonie was saying, or gender, or where people are living, or the knowledge they have, or the tools they're using. So the more we can go to the edges of those differences, and difference being the way people think, move, sense, and feel, but beyond that, also those other characteristics of difference, the more we can understand where that inconsistency is. And if we look for where inconsistency is, that's where opportunity is. And what's really interesting about that, you've just talked about, there's so many innovations that are our fundamental tools today because of designing into those spaces. Those spaces have given people that need and that desire to go and change something because of, either that functional loss or emotional loss that they had. So it's just such a vacuum provides, a draw and an energy that you can design into. And actually, as designers, going to understand those spaces is where you find really interesting and powerful problems to solve, and therefore innovation.
If I can, something you said, there's something that you said just reminded me of what Rama Girawa from the RCA says. He says, if you design at the edges, you get the center for free.
Oh, absolutely.
So if you design for disability, you're going to get all the people who don't have that specific disability for free. It just works. It's like the curb cut effect. So taking an inclusive perspective of how to solve a problem, you're truly helping everyone.
And I think that's the center is not lost when you start at the edge. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it's that perspective that people are so much more than their disability or their specific access need or their specific difference. And they'll still go right across the center of that normal curve in other characteristics. So if you've gone to the edges on one or two areas on each, as you say, that whole center, it's just much more efficient.
I love that saying that's attributed mostly to Plato that says that necessity is the mother of all invention. And, it is about how do we understand the full breadth of necessity, human necessity. And I love the conversation. There's an article by accessibility researcher Richard Ladner where he talks about the need for both self-determination and also technical expertise when we're designing for user empowerment. So self-determination means those with disability have control of the process, like Leonie said before, not just passive recipients of the technology designed for them. So on this, Chris, I know that there's kind of part of the story of how you had your journey into accessibility at Google. You have a love for opera singing and music, and when you moved into a role with Google Play in the music division, it was there that you met a user tester who had a profound impact on you. Can you tell us a little bit about that kind of story, and also specifically, you went on to offer that user tester a job as a manager, and why was that important to you? So a bit of a double-barreled question for you.
Sure. And I think the whole thing actually goes back to Plato's expression. You see, necessity was the mother of invention. I studied opera, but I wasn't very good, so I had to get a job. So I got a job in technology, and it was a much better day job than waiting on tables. But the waiting on tables, though, I do have to say, taught a lot of really important skills about how to interact with people and how to read people. That's a core factor for anything. But going towards fast forward another 15, 18 years, I'm at Google. I'm the lead technical program manager for Google Play Music. And a test engineer came into one of our meetings. She had turned on voiceover. Yes, we worked on iOS. And I heard button, 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 button. I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Well, this is Google Play Music for someone who's blind." I said, "Well, that's stupid. How do they use it?" And she said, "Well, that's why I'm here." And that was my introduction to accessibility. I had 10 years at Apple, 3 years at Sony, a year at Disney. I'd never heard of it. And here was this thing that I realized I've never thought about. Everything I've built was made without consideration, and I should probably do something about that. So within a couple of months, I had the opportunity to take on leading accessibility for Google Play, the whole suite of Play products, but I knew I didn't know anything. So I hired this test engineer as a program manager on my team to teach me what I needed to know about accessibility. She herself is in the community, she's blind, but she's also a PhD and a published poet and author. So just because she's blind doesn't mean she has to be a test engineer. And she just happened to have those skills too. So the breadth of her experience and her ability to communicate was tremendous. And she taught me a lot, and she's still one of my dearest friends.
That's awesome. Such a great story. And Leonie, I remember reading a quote by you where you said that lots of the industry is fixated on audit, kind of audits as the solution. And you went on to say that if you need an audit, then it's probably already too late. Can you tell us a little bit about what you meant by that?
Yes, it's a lot like building a long road to get you from one city to another, and then having built all the road, you discover that there's a big ravine in the way, and you've got to build a bridge. If you've done all the work and you've got to the end, you've got to your product, it's launched, it's out there in the world, and then you start to think about accessibility, it's far too late. You're just going to tip yourself off the edge of that cliff. You will find that you uncover an awful lot of issues. Most of them will sit quite happily on your backlog until a couple of years go round and you either redesign and try to do something about it, or you get it retested and you add a few more issues to your backlog where they sit quite happily for another few months. I'm being a little bit flippant, but the idea is that you've got to think about this from the very beginning. To give another analogy, if you were to build a house and not put any doors into it, you'd have to take the house apart again and put it back together with some suitable spaces for some doors in so people could get in and out. Accessibility is a lot like that. There's only so much you can do to go back and fix it after the fact. Some stuff has to be done right at the origin of the product or the service. Otherwise, you just can't do it. I have no science for this at all, but my several years experience in the industry now tells me that you will probably spend twice as much time and twice as much money trying to retrofit accessibility and only be half as successful. And I'm nothing much has changed my my unscientific opinion of that particular kind of balance of things.
And all that while as well, you're missing out on potential customer dollars as well, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So if the second part of what's needed to design for user empowerment is technical expertise. Christine, what are some of the barriers that you've seen when working with companies all over the world through open inclusion? What are those barriers to engaging technical expertise?
It's really interesting because when I think of expertise, and whether it's about innovation or just as good design, I think of 3 layers of expertise that need to match in order to create something delightful. One of them is that technical or kind of solution expertise, knowing how to mold, manage whatever you're creating, whether it's a built environment, zeros and ones in a digital environment, etc. Then there's a user expertise, which is understanding how it's going to land in the context of a person's life and what that usage is, and you need user expertise into it. And then there's actually an enabling expertise, which is an interesting one that's often forgotten as well, which is that how you bring this together. So it's the people that have the skills, whether it's audit skills, user research skills, engaging with community skills, but also access to finance, access to advice, access to human resources, So when those 3 sets of expertise match, that's when magic happens. And it's not when they're just brought into the room, but when they're actually equally powered, when they're all given not just that, from designing for to designing with, but actually designing by, and that, people working together to design something with all 3 sets of that expertise being matched in the middle to create something delightful. So technical expertise is really important, and particularly when we're looking at things like emerging technology. And Leonie, Christopher and I were just saying that we'd last met at XR Access back in 2019 face to face. Emerging technologies like XR, like autonomous vehicles, like AI, these new spaces that things are happening. You need solution experts that know how to use these tools in a really powerful way and adapt them to the situation that you're solving for, to design something that's going to add real value. But that's like having a really fast car. If you don't have the fuel of the user expertise, it's not going to go anywhere. So it's that matching expertise. So technical expertise is absolutely required, and really high technical expertise is a delight to work with. That's not me, by the way. I'm one of those enablers. But it's those with that matching power, not just matching knowledge. That's when I get excited.
It reminds me of a story. I remember speaking to someone at IBM who was working on some of the kind of the code that was sitting kind of behind the AI for self-driving cars. And she was saying that a good friend of hers actually is a wheelchair user and used to drive their wheelchair by shuffling their feet kind of backwards. So kind of would push themselves backwards in the wheelchair. And she saw that the code that was going into self-driving cars actually could potentially harm her friend, because it considered that a wheelchair user should drive forwards. And it was then that she kind of had this kind of light bulb moment of going, we've got to actually include a broader range of experience in these new technologies, to be able to make sure that it doesn't actually harm my friend. And just kind of building on that though. Yeah, go on, Chris.
What you said just crystallized something in my head. What you described for me is the difference between empathy and experience. Empathy is recognizing that we need to recognize wheelchairs and in our AI, but experience is understanding that sometimes the wheelchairs get pushed backwards. That's the difference in terms of bringing people of the community together.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I guess we make some assumptions in here, don't we, as well, around access to education in order to be a technological expert in some of these things as well. And that is not possible for all people as well. So I've got a good friend who she had to make her decision on which university she could go to based on the fact of its accessibility. And that wasn't kind of providing her with kind of the greatest amount of choice. I don't know, Leonie, have you seen kind of instances where education has kind of a barrier to someone even entering into this space?
Yes, very much so. We know that there are all sorts of challenges for someone with a disability or accessibility need to get into education, get into employment, even get access to technology. In some respects, I think that's changing for the better. When I lost my sight 20 years ago, there were 1 or 2 screen readers available to choose from, and they both cost several hundreds of pounds. which to someone at the time who'd stopped work because I'd lost my sight was, an extraordinary barrier at the time. Now, of course, we have integrated screen readers in pretty much every platform that someone might want to buy a device. And within that, we've got a good or reasonably good array of different cost levels, of devices. So that's one area where I think, the playing field, as they say, has started to level out. But we've got a bit of a circular problem on our hands, because a lot of the barriers, and not just the socioeconomic barriers, it's just simply, if you can't access the educational tools, if you can't access the employment websites to apply for a job, you're never going to get over those barriers, no matter how great your technology is, or no matter how capable you are. Unless we can solve the problem of getting more people with disabilities and different perspectives into education and into the workplace, then we come back to that original question of, we're not designing good products and services without people like that on the team, without them involved in the processes. So we've really got to try and, you've got to start somewhere, I guess. And I think we really need to fix the education problem first, because if we can't fix the education problem, both in terms of getting people access to it and in terms of educating people to build things that are accessible and usable to everybody, the rest of us are just going to keep fighting a rearguard action. So yeah, I think education is core to the solution.
Absolutely. Really well said. And I guess kind of somewhat related to that, there's people around the world that are starting to speak of the great resignation following COVID-19, where a number of people are kind of reconsidering new career opportunities or a new role. And I guess we've seen some of the areas that people with disability have really kind of petitioned for a number of years, flexible working conditions and those sorts of things have been, brought in literally at the drop of a hat in some instances. Are there opportunities here to build back better and to give more opportunities in employment, particularly in technical roles, to people with disability? Chris, I want to ask you, what are some of the opportunities you see here to potentially build back better?
I think coming from Google, we always try to see how technology can provide that the bridge of the mismatch between what a person can do and what the skills and what the society or the technology allows. So taking a moment like COVID and this world we're in, where we have to do things differently, now it becomes a matter of intention to build back better. It will never happen by itself. You have to take the opportunity by the horns. I don't know if that's an American expression or not, but run with it. And not be chased by it, because then you have the opportunity to bring people in, work with a company like Open Inclusion or Technological, bring people in at the beginning, shift that engineering left and do it well, and make these products more accessible and do it broadly. Everyone has an opportunity to do it, no matter where you are. Here at Google, we do it on search, and we'll do it in Android. But everybody has an opportunity to do it. It's a choice that you make. And if you make that choice, one, you make your product better, and two, you're contributing to humanity, and that doesn't suck either.
That's great. Well, Leonie, Chris just mentioned your company Tetralogical as well, and it has 4 values, and one of those is around how you can consider everyone and make decisions that exclude no one. I want to kind of get a little bit practical here. So what does that kind of practically look like as you work with businesses?
Well, it starts with our own. So, when we choose new tools, which we've actually just done recently, we wanted a new project management scheduling kind of tool to use. We're a small company, so we got around the table and we looked at some options, and we found one that was, accessible, usable, and interestingly, not necessarily always in the same way. Some of the team are using the web interface. I'm using an integration into Slack because the website's not so accessible, but actually in Slack it works really well. And that then is how we try and encourage the companies that we work with to think about it, is when you make a decision, not just purchasing, but any decision, a direction you're going to take, a thing you're going to buy. Try and think about the needs of everybody who's involved, and try and think creatively about it. Humans are complicated, varied. We come in all sorts of different shapes, sizes, configurations, abilities, capabilities. And I know universal design is a very sort of popular concept, but I actually think it's a little bit of a myth, because there is nothing that's universally accessible, because humans are so different. But what I do think you can do is encourage people to be inclusive by, as I say, thinking creatively. If solution one works for a number of people, are there alternatives that give people access to that same thing, through different routes and different avenues that give the same experience, the same capability, just in different ways? And so creativity is a big way that we try and encourage companies to think about inclusion.
Just to add to that,
Great.
I think there's just to bring actually two parts of that conversation together. The word Christopher used before, intentionality, and what Leonie was just talking about, which is for the people in question in this group. So when, in tetralogical, Leonie's looking at her team, that's the team that it's relevant for. It's not all of humanity. And I think it's being really conscious, being really intentional about who you are designing for. There are trade-offs, so that I don't believe in universal design. I believe in inclusive design, which is you push the universal, design approach as far as it can go, but there are real limits to it. And then you need to bring adaptive design, optionality, capability that people, as Leonie was just talking about, some people might choose to go at it one way, some might choose to go at it another way. And it's just making sure that there are routes in to everyone that you have intentionally chosen that for. And that won't be absolutely everyone, because there is too much variance in the way humans are. So it's making that as a very conscious decision and not doing it by accident, which is where most of the exclusion happens today.
And if I can build on top of that, this is a really juicy an area here. Customization is critical, because you're never going to be able to create any product that meets everyone's needs. You have to allow people to customize it to meet those needs. Some people need bigger fonts. Some people need easier text. So how you create your interface, how you create your product, by being intentional, you understand what are the options that you want to empower. Who do you want to enable with your technology? So customization is one key factor that I've learned over the years. That is a really powerful way of making something useful for everyone.
And giving agency to the user, because you can't possibly imagine all the contexts of all the users, but they can.
Yeah,
that's really
because like AI could be. You go, Leonie.
No, sorry, go ahead.
All I was going to say is that I think that AI is kind of a double-edged sword in that space, right? Like, because potentially it has the a way of being able to know a particular user and to adapt kind of the needs to that particular user. But if it has been designed in a way that's kind of through assumption, then potentially we're kind of worse off as a result of that. So it holds both promise and kind of potential pitfalls as well. And
that's the thing I was just about to say, is not so much around AI, but you mentioned, not making assumptions, and that's absolutely critical to what Chris and Christine were just saying. It's about empowering the user, the person, to say, look, I want to change this font size, change this color scheme, listen to this rather than read it, not assuming that because person has X disability, this is how they're going to consume the content, or these are the decisions they're going to make. So that assumption kind of, philosophy is so wrong, so bad. It's got to be about empowering people to choose how they consume your content or your product and services.
It's brilliant. Soon we'll have some opportunity for audience questions. So if you'd like to jump into Q&A rather than the chat function and post your questions in there, we'll be able to pose those to our amazing panelists. Christine, what would you like to see to create better conditions around design for user empowerment? What would you like to see kind of everyone on this call and those that will listen to this afterwards do?
Such a gorgeous question. A little bit like Christopher, I came to this actually quite late and, in my own quirky way. And I was a designer for a number of decades before I became an inclusive designer. So I've got a really strong perspective on this because I failed people, not because I didn't turn up with intent every day to do something delightful, but because I didn't know better. And because I didn't have that fuel to do better, that knowledge of how people experience things differently, that I was creating and imagining and designing with all positive intent for them, and not having that knowledge of how that was being consumed and how that was being experienced to do something better. So to me, it's preventing people from being me in the future by giving people the tools, the fuel, the capability, the confidence and the competence to be able to understand that early on, as Leonie was talking about before, not building a house with no doors and then going, dang, we didn't let the people that were actually really wanting to come into this house actually get in. So to lower the bar of knowledge and of experience to allow people to understand how people differ and how that difference is going to impact the design that they're creating, so that, and also to lower the bar on design, that there's not this a community of designers and non-designers. I'd actually like to see a real fluidity of people stepping in and out, everyone having a role in design and having a more shared power. You don't need to go to a certain college and university and have a degree with a capital D on it, but that people are actually empowered to come in and create stuff better. And technology is such an enabler of that, because you don't need to know how to write JavaScript to know how to design something better. You need people that can do that. You need people that have that technical capability. But to bring more people into the design part of that have more experiences, that experience is intuitive to them, and also to be able to reach to experiences more easily that are not intuitive to them.
Yeah, I love that. And sorry, you go, Chris.
Oh, I think it did, but I wasn't about to say something, but I do have something to say. I always have something to say. What you said, Christine, reminds me of something that I talk about when I give sort of a lecture on how to build inclusively, and I have sort of 3 key points. One is do what you're good at. Do something where you have some technical expertise, because like in jazz, you need to improvise. You need to understand where you're going and how to get there. Next is nothing about us without us, to Leonie's point. And the third, and for me, this is important when talking with people who are just getting started, is start with one. Start with one person, solve one person's problems first and do it well. Because you have the technical expertise, then you can expand it and broaden it and make it a solution that is more robust and provide support for more people.
And I'd add to that and say, don't be afraid. That's the other thing.
Yes.
This is a serious matter. Of course it is, but don't be scared by it. I knew nothing about accessibility until I got interested, and bit by bit I learned. If I look back on some of the first websites I built back when I was a designer in the 90s, horrors. Just all the accessibility nightmares, all in one
marquee
website.
a lot,
Christine said. As Christine said, not because I had any bad intent. I just didn't know any better. And just read one blog post, listen to this podcast, one thing, and just decide today I'm going to do one thing differently. I'm going to learn one thing and I'm going to put it into practice. Give it a few days of doing that. Choose another thing. Move on, move up, keep going. But just don't be scared to get started. Whatever you do, it's vital.
I love that.
I think that's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, I often talk about 2 things get in the way of people stepping into inclusion more fully, really often. One of them is fear and the other is complexity. And what Leonie and Christopher have both just given you are 2 beautiful ways of getting around that. So firstly, everyone gets stuff wrong, and this is a world that you can never know everything. It's a journey and you never get off it, and actually that's the joy of it. So just get into it, take one step, get curious, learn, keep learning. You never step off that learning map that's moving under us as well, because even if you thought that you could possibly get to know the 7 billion configurations of humanity, which of course we can't, we're also innovating all the time in our environment. So those matches and mismatches are never ending. So don't worry about the fact that they're never ending. Just get in and enjoy it and leverage the bits that you know about and do that thing that you can today. And that's that getting it, not worrying about complexity, not worrying about solving for everyone and everything, but do that one thing, leveraging your skills that you can do today to do something better.
That is so brilliantly put by all three of you. I feel like that's kind of, we should just like tie a bow in this webinar right now with that point. But we do have some questions here from the audience. So Paul Warren has asked, to find solution experts, is working with a university that supports students with a disability a good place to find this talent? And the second part of the question is, I'm trying to find the right path to iterate, and I'm unsure if students will have time. Who would like to answer that one? Christine, would you like to take that one?
Students, I think it doesn't matter where you go, recognise the limitations and the strengths of communities of people. So if you're going to students, you've got a lot of energy, you've got a lot of intent, you'll probably have some really fresh ideas because people haven't been anchored in decades of thinking in a certain way. So there's some real advantages of leveraging students for technical expertise or new ways of thinking and not being too anchored. Equally, there's not a lot of life experience. And so that, Leonie talking about just turning up and failing, I did that for decades as well, that you turn up and you learn over time. So recognizing that there's a trade-off either side and actually trying to balance. And again, that where Christopher was talking about, Realm always goes to the edges. I often draw a star and go out to the edges of the star. Students are one edge of that in terms of life experience. And depending on what they're studying, what their expertise is that they've learned, they'll have different particular capabilities they're bringing, but look to what they're not bringing and look to who you can balance that with, that can bring a different perspective to balance where those gaps might be. If you're only looking to one community, there will be gaps. That's in any community, not just
I
you.
love that. We had a question that came through from Jennifer related to this, and she was asking, what criteria do testers need to become trusted testers or better testers? Does anyone want to answer that one?
I can take this one. Trusted tester is an overloaded term, to use a computer science thing. It has lots of different meanings. In the US, there is a capital T trusted tester, which has to do with Section 508 testing, which is like website testing, essentially. At Google, we have a thing called, we have a trusted tester program, lowercase t is on both sides, though we sometimes will capitalize it. But this is for people who are in the community who want to help and sort of test early our software and provide feedback for us. So I think the most important thing is you have to be good at some piece of tech, some piece of assistive tech. So you want to, because you need to be able to provide meaningful feedback, and not just what's broken, but also what's really important is how you can do it better. So have an ability to use the technology thoughtfully and explain what's broken and how it could be done better. I think those are sort of, and be willing to do it, be hungry to and enjoy that kind of work. So those are the three things: understand the technology, be able to explain what's working, what's not working well, and then just enjoy doing it.
If I can add a layer to that, I think, it's really important to have those things. But actually, I don't think so much of trusted testers as I do trusted insight. And there's a real difference between the two. It's not the person that we trust or don't trust. The person is the person. They turn up with intent. Yes, that's important. They turn up with capability around a specific assistive technology. That's important. But let's also be really conscious of that varies enormously from person to person. An expert screen reader is very different. Screen reader user is very different to someone who's a novice screen reader user. And these are both trusted testers if you've designed the research to understand and engage them in a way that will get you the insight that's going to inform what you're doing. So the person just needs to be genuine, authentic, honest, look for good as well as bad. You're not just looking to find all the problems. You actually want to tell people what they've done right, so they protect that. They don't by accident throw away what's already working. So to me, people are trusted. It's not that the test is trusted, the other person is trusted. And it's up to the researcher or the organisation doing the review to make sure that they're given the framing of the question that gives you trusted insight. And that's you need to know that you can trust what you're hearing to make a better decision on the basis of.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. One of the other questions we've had come through was from Jonathan Shah. Hi, Jono. It is, how can inclusion in the disability space not only work on disability inclusion, but lift the economic participation of people with disabilities? So this is really kind of to the core of, not just kind of being involved in part of the process, but how do we actually see kind of genuine inclusion that actually lifts the economic participation of people with disabilities? Who would like to answer that one?
I guess in some senses it comes back to that circular problem I was mentioning before. The best way we can elevate participation by people with disabilities is to make sure that the tools, resources, other paraphernalia that are part of those processes are accessible and usable by those people. It doesn't matter how many degrees you've got if the website that you need to apply for the job that you want is not accessible. It's just as simple as that. So we've really got to solve accessibility to a large extent, I think, to solve the kind of participation and elevation of that participation.
If I can build on top of that, I think the other form of accessibility is important too. That we have there is training that is affordable and available. So it has to be available first, and then it has to be accessible, because one and not the other doesn't really solve the problem. So having training that gives people first basic digital skills, and then the more advanced skills. There are a bunch of great certification programs that at Google, we have a Grow with Google program where we have like a program management, design, data science certifications that will give you the skills necessary to get a job. So there has to be trainings that can be that are available, and they have to be made accessible.
I think that's really important. I think it's also fluidity of different ways people might wish to engage and participate. So we're talking about the change post-COVID and giving people different ways of participating in creating value. And I think the disability community, by the nature of mismatch in the world, is incredibly innovative and creative, and as we were talking about, incredibly valuable because of the insights through that, understanding where those mismatches and where those gaps and opportunity spaces are. It's turning the innovative into innovators. It's turning creative into creators, and allowing that valuable to be valuable to the individuals that have that value. And there's so many different ways that can happen. I mean, even Remarkable and the program you've got is taking that entrepreneurial, taking that innovative perspective and allowing people to become entrepreneurs, and helping people bring that enabling capability in, and saying, how can we support people through that learning process to go from I've got a great idea to actually being able to commercialize that idea and be supported in doing so. Even things like the programs in the UK that are designed around innovation, just little things like making sure that the process to apply for them is accessible, and not just accessible from an audit accessibility way, but inclusive, and considering how different perspectives are going to generate a more innovative and more valuable solution, so that the people reviewing them are actually taking that into consideration as they review them. So there's such natural value there. It's being able to make sure that value is able to be generated by the people involved in that.
It's brilliant. We have so many other questions that I'd love to get to, but we've actually come to the end of our time. So I want to ask one last question, and if we can keep it brief, that would be great. But if we're to ask each of you, what is one insight or way that we can design for user empowerment, what would your insight or what would your encouragement be? Let's start with you, Leonie.
Get to know the different medium or media for which you're designing. So if you're an oil painter, you get to know how oil paints behave. If you're a watercolorist, you understand the differences. It's the same here. You, as a designer or a developer of a product, will be familiar with the difference between a desktop or a laptop interaction and a tablet device or a phone device. Broaden that out, get to understand what the modes of interaction, what the media are like for someone who listens to content, and feel free to experiment with that and to design good experiences, because they're all different modes of interaction. What's it like when you speak to your technology instead of use other input devices? What's the experience like for that? Think about, the language that someone needs to use. So yeah, get amongst it, get used to the different modes of interaction, and broaden your horizons and start designing for different experiences right the way across the spectrum.
Love that. Thanks, Leonie. Christine.
I'm going to keep mine a short one. Unlearn. It's a slightly weird one. Rather than just looking to learn, look at yourself and work out what we need to unlearn. So if we're going to, we've just gone through a pandemic again, there are things that we assume either individually or in our society that are barriers to our progression going forward. So get curious about where they are in ourselves individually, and start with yourself, but actually also in organizations, in your own organization, obviously, in ripples around yourself and out from yourself, and in society as well, and work out, what do we need to unlearn that is limiting us today, that is limiting our ability to see and do better? Because there's actually quite a lot. And the more we engage with people, the more we can see that more easily and more quickly. And that gives us the ability to see these spaces that are all around us all the time, where we can just do things so much better. So yeah, rather than just thinking about learning, thinking about what we need to unlearn to get there.
Love it. And Chris, what's one remarkable insight that you could leave us with around designing for user empowerment?
I'm embarrassed to talk after Leonie and Christina, because nothing I have to say is really remarkable. I guess the thing I would say is, you're never going to get it right. So you need to provide options for people, because everyone is, I used to say people are hard. Everyone is a complicated human being. Christine said there was like 7 billion permutations of humanity. And I think there's even more than that, just because people are so difficult, because the situation changes, so the same person's environment will cause them to react differently. So as you're designing your experiences, you want to do it with the community, because you're never going to know what the problem is. It's the wheelchair forwards versus the wheelchair backwards problem. So you want to provide solutions and variations of the solutions. But now that sounds really scary. I have to do everything? No, you work with a community to understand what is the most important thing and provide the most important options first. And when you become successful, as Leonie said, learn something new every day, bring it together and continue to develop. So you create a product that is robust and thoughtful and designed with intent.
Love that.
Love it. And what rubbish has something remarkable to share.
Yeah, totally. Spot on. Absolutely spot on. Well, I want to thank each of our panelists, Leonie, Christine, and Chris. Thank you so much for your insights today. It's been fantastic. Thank you for getting up early to talk to us here in Australia, and for those that are joining us from other parts of the world. Thanks also to David Childs, our Auslan interpreter. Thank you. And Remarkable recently launched a fellowship program called the Jessica King Fellowship. It was launched in honour of one of our founders who is no longer with us, but it is aimed at providing pathways for people with disability to explore the world of entrepreneurship and startups. It involves a 6-month support program, $5,000 donation to your learning, and you can put that to use in whatever way you choose. And we also provide mentoring over those 6 months as well from incredible mentors. Applications are currently open. They close next month. So if you or someone you know could be interested in that, please head to our website, remarkable.org.au, and look for the Jessica King Fellowship. And we'll be seeking your feedback on this webinar as well. If there's any other feedback of ways that we can do this better, we'd love to hear that. This recording will be made available on YouTube in the days coming. And this kind of conversation is vital. We really do hope that that you've learned something today that is an actionable insight, something that you can put into practice. And I love some of the things. There's a number of things that I'm taking away from this around kind of not being scared, around kind of trying one thing, and around unlearning as well. I think it's fantastic. So thank you for joining us. Our next event will be on International Day for People with Disability on December the 3rd. And our incredible host is going to be Hannah Davini. I'm taking a break, and Hannah's going to be doing that session with you all. So thank you to everyone who's joined us today, and thanks again to our panelists. Really do appreciate your insights today. Enjoy the rest of your evening, your morning, your day, and we'll see you again next time.